If you've seen the headlines recently, you realise we need to talk about Iran. So how did we get here? And why is this all coming to a head right now? Now, as is so often the case, this supervillain does have a tragic origin story, but just like the comic books, knowing the story helps you understand their motives, but it doesn't necessarily absolve them from their crimes. Now, to understand the Islamic Revolution that brought the current regime into power in 1978, you have to first go back to 1953. Now, at this time, Iran was something like a constitutional monarchy, and the very popular prime minister at the time was a guy named Mohammad Mossadegh. Now, Mossadegh was trying to nationalize the foreign-owned oil industry in Iran, which was generally run by a company that would eventually become known as BP. Now, this attempt to nationalize the oil industry obviously infuriated the West, led to sanctions. It was a long sordid affair, but ultimately led to a CIA-backed coup in which Mossadegh was overthrown and the Shah was placed in power as an absolutist autocrat. The Shah ruled over Iran with an iron fist for another 26 years, the resentment within the country building and building all that time. And eventually it was the Islamic clerics within the country that were able to galvanize that public resentment and lead a popular revolution against the Shah. The Shah was forced to flee to America, his autocracy falling and replaced with a fundamentalist Islamic theocracy. During the revolution, students stormed the US embassy and seized 53 American diplomats and held them hostage. Their demand was that the Americans hand over the Shah so that they could put him on trial for crimes against the Iranian people. The Americans refused. Eventually the Shah would die of natural causes and the hostages were eventually released about a year later. But America and Iran have never recovered diplomatically from this moment. Now, ever since the establishment of the Islamic Republic, the Iranians have, and not without good cause, had concerns that the US might attempt yet again regime change within Iran. So got to working pretty much straight away on the creation of a nuclear deterrent. The Iranians thought that the only way to prevent an inevitable US invasion of Iran was having a nuclear weapon. Now, obviously, this was intolerable to the West and have enacted sanctions and diplomatically isolated Iran for decades, all in an attempt to prevent Iran having a nuclear weapon. But the US aren't the only ones with concerns about a nuclear-armed Iran. For decades, the Iranians have openly stated their ambition to wipe Israel off the map. These are genuine, constant, genocidal statements. So for the Israelis, the idea of a nuclear-armed Iran is a genuine existential threat against every Israeli. And this is part of the reason why Iran spends so much money funding and arming Hamas, because it weakens Israel and distracts them from their major geopolitical goal, which is preventing Iran getting a nuclear weapon. But to truly understand Iran's motivation in the regions, we do need to talk about that sectarian schism within Islam, Sunni and Shia Islam. Now, we're not going to talk about the theology. All you need to know is that the majority of the Middle East is Sunni, Shia minorities scattered throughout. Iran is majority Shia. They see themselves as the defenders of Shia everywhere. And like all revolutionary regimes, they want to export their revolution, especially to these other Shia minorities. It's part of the reason why Iraq was so unstable after the US invasion, because Iran was directly funding and arming Shia militia who would then engage in sectarian warfare against Sunni Iraqis. It meant that the Iranian army was directly fighting alongside the Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad, an Alawite Muslim, as he brutalized his people, a Sunni majority population, for years. It meant funding and arming Hezbollah in Lebanon, a country that for so long had maintained this delicate balance of looking after the interests of Sunni, Shia and Christian Lebanese. Then all of a sudden there's this Shia fundamentalist militia, which is now even stronger than the Lebanese army, completely destabilizing the country. And it's also meant the funding of the Houthis in Yemen, another fundamentalist Shia militia that have ensured a prolonged, brutal, barbarous civil war in another Sunni majority country. Ultimately, in its desire to spread its Shia Islamic revolution across the Middle East, it has ensured that the region has remained crippled by instability and civil war. And when discussing this subject, we also shouldn't neglect to mention the fact that the Iranian regime is a brutal theocracy that oppresses and murders its own people. Women in the LGBT community in particular suffer greatly under the strict religious rule. And as someone who's actually been to Iran, I'm pretty confident to say that many Iranians despise the Iranian regime more than anyone anywhere else in the world. So why does this matter now? The acts of October 7th by Hamas, an Iranian-funded and backed militia, were perceived by many in Israel as a bit of a gloves-off moment. They saw this as an attack on Israel by Iran. And this has led to Israeli airstrikes directly targeting Iranian officers in Syria. This is an unprecedented escalation. Meanwhile, down in Yemen, the Houthis, another Iranian-funded and backed militia, have been sinking commercial shipping vessels in the Red Sea with missiles given to them by Iran. And as I've posted about in the past, there is a sense that Netanyahu actually wants to invite that all-out regional war between Israel and Iran. Having watched Iran continue to develop its nuclear weapons program, Netanyahu believes a war with Iran isn't just inevitable, but it's necessary to prevent them ever getting that nuclear weapon. By targeting senior military officers in this airstrike in Syria, Netanyahu is daring the Iranian regime to escalate in its retaliation, because they're confident that if Iran does, the US and much of the West will put aside its concerns about civilian casualties in Gaza and join Israel in this civilizational fight against Iran. And believe it or not, that's the abridged version. I haven't discussed Saudi Arabia at all, who play a huge role in this all. I haven't discussed Russia or China, because if I did, this video would go on forever. These are genuinely precarious times. The world is sitting, waiting and watching to see how Iran retaliates, and whether that retaliation will bring the regional war that Netanyahu wants, or perhaps even a global war. We just don't know. We just need to sit, wait and watch and stay informed.